President Trump just signed a new executive order that could reshape childhood vaccine recommendations in the United States. It calls for separating the MMR vaccine into 3 individual shots, spacing childhood vaccines across separate medical visits, and changing which vaccines are routinely recommended for every child. But here's the part that's getting lost online. This does not mean every child's vaccine schedule changes tomorrow. So what exactly did Trump sign, and what actually happens next? On August 10, President Donald Trump signed an executive order titled Delivering Gold Standard Childhood Vaccine Recommendations for Americans. The administration says the goal is to give parents more choice, align U.S. recommendations with practices in other developed countries, and reconsider the timing and sequencing of childhood vaccines. But major medical groups are pushing back, saying the changes are not supported by the existing scientific evidence and could create confusion for parents. That clash is why this story suddenly exploded online. Change number 1. Fewer vaccines routinely recommended for every child. The executive order divides childhood immunizations into 3 categories. The first category includes vaccines recommended for all children, covering 11 diseases, including measles, mumps, rubella, polio, tetanus, pertussis, HPV, and chickenpox. Other immunizations are placed into categories for certain higher risk groups or for what is called shared clinical decision-making between families and healthcare providers. That category includes vaccines for illnesses such as influenza and COVID-19, as well as some recommendations involving hepatitis A, hepatitis B, rotavirus, and meningococcal disease. The White House describes this as giving parents and doctors more flexibility. But remember, this is a federal recommendation framework. It is not the same thing as banning those vaccines or making them unavailable. Change number 2. Splitting up MMR. This is probably the most controversial part of the order. The MMR vaccine currently protects against 3 diseases in one vaccination: measles, mumps, and rubella. Trump's order says those should eventually be administered as 3 separate single-disease vaccines. There is one major catch. Those separate products are not currently available as standard licensed options in the United States. FDA's current licensed vaccine list includes combination MMR vaccines, such as MMR2 and Priorix. And the executive order itself says the transition to separate measles, mumps, and rubella shots would happen once those products are domestically available. So parents are not suddenly being offered 3 separate MMR shots today. Change number 3. More separate visits. The order also says that, whenever feasible, childhood immunizations should be administered during separate medical visits. That could eventually mean more appointments instead of giving several recommended vaccines during one visit. The administration argues this provides parents more control over timing and frequency. But public health experts interviewed by the Associated Press argue that spreading vaccines across additional visits can leave children unprotected for longer and can make it harder for families to complete recommended vaccination schedules. Does your child's school requirement change? Here's another important distinction. The president does not directly set vaccine requirements for every school in America. Those requirements are largely controlled by states. Trump's executive order advises states and territories to review their school vaccination laws and consider aligning them with the new recommendations. But that advice does not automatically rewrite every state's law. So if you're a parent wondering whether your child's school requirements changed overnight, the answer is generally no. Any actual change will depend heavily on what happens at the federal agency level and what individual states decide to do. What happens in the next 90 days? This may be the most important part to watch. Trump ordered the Department of Health and Human Services, through its Task Force on Safer Childhood Vaccines, to present plans within 90 days. Those plans are supposed to address how separate vaccines, such as individual measles, mumps, and rubella shots, could be offered, how vaccine timing and sequencing should be assessed, and how vaccine safety monitoring and research could be expanded. So this executive order is partly a policy declaration and partly the beginning of another implementation process. The next major developments could come from HHS, CDC, vaccine manufacturers, courts, and individual states. Why doctors are pushing back? The American Academy of Pediatrics has strongly criticized the move. Its president told the Associated Press that the scientific evidence supporting vaccines and their effectiveness has not suddenly changed. Medical experts also continue to reject claims that childhood vaccines cause autism. Trump discussed autism while announcing the order, but decades of research have not established a causal connection between vaccination and autism. That disagreement between the administration and major medical organizations is a central part of why this story has become so controversial, why the timing matters. This debate is happening during a significant rise in measles cases in the United States. As of August 6, the CDC reported 2,465 confirmed measles cases nationwide in 2026, already exceeding the total reported during all of 2025. That makes any change involving the measles vaccine particularly sensitive right now. But the increase in measles cases began before this August 10 executive order, so the current outbreak should not be presented as a consequence of the new policy. So what actually changed? Trump has established a new federal policy direction for childhood vaccines. It favors fewer vaccines being universally recommended, more individualized decisions for some vaccines, separate administration of MMR components once those products become available, and more spacing between vaccinations. But it did not instantly ban vaccines. It did not immediately eliminate the combined MMR vaccine. And it did not automatically rewrite vaccination rules at every American school. Those distinctions matter. That's why Trump's childhood vaccine executive order is trending right now. The headline sounds like an immediate nationwide change. The reality is more complicated, and many of the biggest changes are still ahead. This is why it's trending.